And this is the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association Clean Energy Seminar Series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the traditional municipalization as a preferred path to clean energy in Michigan. It'll be presented by Greg Woodring from Ann Arbor Public Power. I'm your host, Mark Levy. I'm the Vice President of Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. And our financial sponsors for this Clean Energy Seminar Series are the Michigan Department of Environmental and Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, and McNaughton and McKay in Ann Arbor. GLREA is celebrating its 30-year anniversary this year. Seems like many of us have been around since the inception. We were formed in 1991 and supported financially by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy in the Great Lakes. We're still here and we're still swinging for the fences. We have a Great Lakes Zoom programs. This is one of the things that came out of COVID. That actually probably worked out really well for people, Zooms. So we put on 4 sessions each month, every Thursday. Our first Thursday of each month is Ann Arbor Solar Stories, hosted by Julie Roth, who's the manager of Solarize Ann Arbor, doing case studies on solar installations in Ann Arbor. Second Thursday is the Clean Energy Seminars, hosted by myself, where we focus on issues that relate to the broad issues related to solar energy. Third Thursday of each month, we do Detroit Solar Stories. It's hosted by Diane Van Bureau. She's a member of GLREA's Board of Directors and President of Zachary and Associates. And then the fourth Thursday of each month, John Sarver does Solar Stories all across Michigan, which I believe now is in its second year. So John started this with his Solar Stories, and we've all jumped on his bandwagon. So I want to thank John for that. Our Clean Energy Seminar Series covers topics of particular interest to clean energy users, businesses, advocates, and stakeholders. Seminars include content ranging from technology to business to public policy. CES is a Zoom event, and again, it's held every Thursday of the month. Tonight we're off a week, but normally we're the second week. We ask that you, when you come on, please mute yourself and hold all your questions until the end of the presentation. You can raise your hand under the reactions to ask a question, and I'll call on you, and we can get your questions to Greg. There are a lot of things you can do to help GLREA to help you. We're out here trying to beat the drum. One, you can renew your GLREA membership and encourage others to join by going to our website. You can sign up online. You can financially sponsor a membership for a local teacher or some students. And last of all, you can make a financial donation to GLREA to support our work. You can contact John Freeman, our GLREA Executive Director, at that email address or website, and you can make a donation to us. So tonight is my sincere pleasure to welcome Greg Woodring, Ann Arbor Public Power, to the Clean Energy Seminar. A traditional municipal utility, or municipalization, is an electric utility owned and operated by a local government versus an investor-owned utility or a municipal sustainable energy utility that focuses only on green power. Michigan has 40 traditional municipal utilities, several of which generate clean energy. Traverse City Light and Power, Lansing Board of Water and Light, and Holland Electric are examples. Like many communities across the state, the Ann Arbor A20 plan calls for the city to transition from fossil to renewable, i.e. clean energy sources, as a way to mitigate climate change risks. Frustration is growing among citizens and policymakers concerning DTE Energy's intransigence with regard to A2 Energy's clean energy goals. Within this context, Ann Arbor Public Policy has come forth and is calling upon the city of Ann Arbor to become a traditional municipal utility so that they can generate their own clean energy. Tonight, Greg Woodring, Ann Arbor Public Power, will discuss traditional municipalization as a preferred clean energy option for Michigan. He will also discuss their model, their organization as a viable model and pathway for Ann Arbor and other communities. And so, Greg, I want to welcome you to GLREA's Clean Energy Seminar and look forward to a really good presentation. Thanks. Let me stop this.
Thank you, Mark. I'll go ahead and throw my slides up here.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So thank you all for attending. I really appreciate GLREA for giving us a space to speak here. My name is Greg, as Mark said, from Ann Arbor for Public Power. So what is Ann Arbor for Public Power? Well, We're a coalition of many local organizations, representation from DSA, Sunrise, Indivisible, Climate Action Movement, Washtenaw 350, Ann Arbor Beyond Bernie, and more. And we're all united in the belief that we want a green and publicly owned future. Our 5Ds, as we call them, is to democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, and decolonize our energy sources. I suppose that's 4Ds. My apologies there. And so just to get into a little bit of how we got together. So around fall of 2019, a group of us were kind of kicking around this idea, talking about it more generally. It was something that was kind of being talked about within DSA National, which I am a member of. And we really wanted to see this put forward. We really thought that this was a viable path forward for municipalization, for reaching 100% clean energy. And when the 820 plan came out, we were really excited by it. We were really excited that the city was committing to a 2030 carbon neutrality goal. We were really excited by a lot of the different proposals within the plan. But when it came to the actual energy generation, we were a little bit more nervous. The city was calling for a CCA plan, community choice aggregation, which for anyone who doesn't know, community choice aggregation would essentially allow cities to use the existing IOU service lines, the investor-owned utility service lines, to transmit energy that they buy from a source other than the IOU, right? So they could buy it from a renewable generation, facility somewhere outside of the city, some wind farms on the Great Lakes or a solar farm down in Arizona or something like that, right? And this sounded like a great idea. We were certainly really excited by that idea. But we met with our state senator, Jeff Irwin, and asked him, does this sound like policy that's going to be likely to pass? And he said, again, I support the policy as well, but I don't really see that as very likely. And so we said, well, what about municipalization? What do you think about this idea? And he thought, that sounds like a lot more realistic, that this sounds like a lot more realistic option that we could bring forward. So we kind of kept meeting, and ultimately we grew into the organization we are today, and we've been advocating within the city, at the Energy Commission and at the city council level, pushing for this, and just doing outreach into the community, spreading awareness about that idea. So that's kind of who we are as an org. And so what is the problem that we're really concerned about? I kind of mentioned it before, but frankly, it comes down to the fact that just DTE is not transitioning to renewables fast enough to meet global or local emissions targets. And I mean, this is also true of consumers' energy, but consumers is certainly a lot further ahead than DTE is at the moment. So DTE just produces dirty power. 61% of their power generation, according to their 2020 filings, is from coal. 19% of it is from fracked gas or oil. 11% of it is from nuclear, and only 9% of it is from renewables. That includes some amount of burned garbage as renewable power. So not exactly the type of renewable power we would like to see. They're actually the third dirtiest energy mix of all of the IOUs in the entire country. And it really, their goals are just incompatible with ours. Ann Arbor, as we've mentioned, has a carbon neutrality date of 2030. President Joe Biden set a carbon-free electricity nationwide by 2035, but DTE has set a plan for reaching it by 2050. But it's worse than that. DTE doesn't even really have a realistic plan to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. They plan to retire their 12 existing coal-fired generators in 2040, which is 10 years past what the IPCC tells us is necessary, and 10 years past where we in Ann Arbor want to be. But as far as their fracked gas, they're even worse. They actually plan to never move off of these fracked gas plants, at least officially. And they're currently planning to construct an additional $1 billion fracked gas plant in St. Clair County. Um, and their plan for reaching carbon neutrality with these fracked gas facilities is just based off of some technological wishful thinking as we think about it. They plan on some new technology making it so that this fracked gas no longer is releasing carbon into the atmosphere. But really, most of the carbon emissions from fracked gas are not just from the burning. Certainly the burning is still releasing some carbon, but even if you could reach zero on burning the fossil fuel, you're still going to be releasing an immense amount of carbon through the extraction of the fossil fuel, the fracking of it. So we don't really accept DTE's plan. We think that it is incompatible with our goals and, really, frankly, life on the planet as it is. So what do we see as the solution? Well, you probably all know the answer to that. It's municipalization. So what is municipalization? Essentially, it is taking something that is privately owned, so the energy distribution infrastructure within the city of Ann Arbor, and moving it into something that is publicly owned at the municipal level, right? Municipalization. This is a pretty common model for distributing utilities. Most people get their water and sewage from a municipal model. And it's actually not that uncommon for power utilities. More than 2,000 communities across the United States have municipal energy utilities, and over 40 of them, 42 in fact, of those municipal utilities are located in Michigan. And that's something that is explicitly protected by the Michigan State Constitution and the city charter of Ann Arbor, but this is broader. Every city in Michigan has either has these provisions already enshrined in it within its city charter, or could simply amend them, right? It is a right guaranteed by the state constitution to cities or townships, anything that operates at a municipality level, to purchase out the infrastructure and run its own utility. And I can get it. There's a bit more of a longer legal history to this that I'm going to get into later, but just laying it out there, this is a legal path forward for reaching 100% renewable power, which many of the other proposed paths in front of us are not. So there's really 5 main areas where we see municipal power beating out our current investor-owned utility model. It is more reliable, it is more affordable, it affords us local control, it invests in our community, and finally, as I think probably most of the people listening here today feel, it's most importantly, it is environmentally responsible. So, reliability. Now, on average, nationwide, municipal utilities lose power about half as often as their investor-owned utility counterparts. Now, the national data that we found from the American Public Power Association says that municipal utilities are without power for an average of 74 minutes per year. In comparison, their investor-owned utility counterparts are without power for about 136 minutes per year. However, just looking at the nationwide data does not really tell you the full story from Michigan. In Michigan, and this is 2017 numbers, and I can almost guarantee you that these numbers would be higher and more disproportionate this year than in 2017. DTE lost power for over 1,000 minutes. The city of Lansing, the state's largest municipal utility, lost power for just a bit over 250 minutes, which is about a quarter of the downtime that they experienced. And they experience this all while paying less money for the service that they're getting. Municipal utilities are on average nationwide cheaper by about 14%. However, once again, the nationwide data does not quite tell the full story in Michigan. Ann Arbor with DTE is paying roughly about 17.51 cents per kilowatt hour. Chelsea, Ann Arbor's next door neighbor, is paying about 10.15 cents per kilowatt hour, which is about a 40% lower cost for their service. Lansing's paying about a 14.71 cents per kilowatt hour, still significantly lower with a quarter of the downtime. But we don't just believe in this plan because it is cheaper and better power, though honestly, that's probably enough to convince someone to want to go down this pathway. And it certainly has been enough to convince many people to go down this pathway in the past. It's typically the area that convinces people to go down this pathway. And with our recent outages that we've all been dealing with, or at least those of us in Southeast Michigan have been dealing with, it's certainly even more relevant. But it also affords us local control. With a municipal utility, we would be in control of our rates. We would be in control of our infrastructure, and we would be in control of our source of power. These are decisions that are rather monumental for a community. They affect us on our daily lives. They affect how often our power is going to go out. They affect how much money we're going to be paying for our service, and they affect what our the future of our planet's going to be looking like. And they should not be in the hands of a few small corporate executives. They should be put back democratically in the hands of the people. And in addition to that, it invests in our community. Now, this is a little bit jargony, and I'm going to have some more concrete numbers here for you in a second so that you can look at how much money municipal utilities tend to put back into their community. But on average, nationwide, public power utilities pay about 5.6% of their electric operating revenue back to their state and local governments. Investor-owned utilities pay about 4.2% through taxes. Municipal utilities will pay that through something called pilot payment in lieu of taxes. However, it isn't just about the money that is directly being transferred back to the community, which certainly can and is significant for many of these communities. Public power also means that you're going to be able to have good local union jobs. You have more ability to protect these unions, which is particularly important right now. And this is I think, often under-discussed aspect of our climate migration. Your average coal worker working in a utility plant could be making somewhere around $40 an hour. Your average solar contractor installing solar panels is being paid about $17 per hour. So it's not really hard to see why it is that many of these unions are resistant to the idea of moving to renewable energy. There's just frankly isn't really a unionized workforce built out in these industries. And when you use a municipal utility to make this type of transaction, rather than this type of transition, rather than doing it piecemeal, house by house, with individual people buying individual contractors, you get these economies of scale, and you get the ability to do these bulk buy and these bulk installation programs, and you get the ability to use things like responsible contracting agreements so that you can help build up these industries and help bring along unionized work into the future with renewable energy, which is going to be vitally important just from a political standpoint, right? And this and I know I'm getting a little tangential here, but this is a really core point of our whole political mode of thought on this topic, is that it needs to be a populist movement. If you want people to get on board with the transition to renewable energy that we all need to do, then you need to show people that there's something in it for them. And with a municipalization, you show them that there is less payment out of their pockets, there's better reliability, and we're going to protect the workers that come along with us. So when we say invest in our community, we really mean that this is how we make sure that the transition doesn't fall on the backs of working class people. In fact, it enriches them and brings them forward with us into the future. And finally, and I think, as most people probably agree here, most importantly, municipalization is environmentally responsible. It allows us to get to 100% renewable on our terms. We're not waiting for when some executives decide it is most profitable for them to move over to renewable energy. Through a combination of local generation and purchase power, we have a clear path to 100% renewable energy. And this is really valuable and a really valuable point for municipalization. With the full traditional municipalization, as some have been calling it, you aren't just able to install generation within your city. Certainly you can. Certainly there are a lot of good programs that other municipal utilities do, right? On-bill financing to weatherize your home, because some of the most valuable electricity is the electricity that you're not generating, right? That's some of the best savings that you can do, what has been referred to as negawatts. In addition, you can do solar installation, and you can do this at a bulk buy program to bring down costs, and you can do it with on-bill financing so that the savings that people are getting on their electric bill are paying off the investment that they made onto their home to put these solar panels in. But also, you have the entire national grid at your disposal. You're not just locked into what you are able to generate within your municipality, which frankly, for most municipalities will not be able to generate 100% of their power needs, and certainly won't be able to do it stably. We would still have that connection to the MISO grid, which are regional connection to the national grid, which means that we could engage in power purchase agreements to any clean generating facilities in the state, similar to what the CCA plan was attempting to do, except for this is 100% legal and we can do it right now. Furthermore, municipalization allows us to have a lot more discretion with just what we're doing on a personal level. I kind of already touched on this, but I think that probably a lot of people here are aware of and likely frustrated by the caps on distributed generation that are enforced in the state. DTE has discretion over these caps. The state has said that you have to allow people a minimum of 1% local distributed generation. DTE has kept it at that 1% minimum. Consumers has very graciously raised it to 2. With a municipal utility, you can raise that cap to whatever you want because that discretion has been left to the utility, right? So you can raise that up to 100%. Now, you may need to stagger it to a certain extent to allow the infrastructure to get updated. And also, there are union concerns about if you just raise it all the way up, then suddenly you're going to blow up the market. So there's discussions there to be had, but it puts it under our control. We don't have to wait around for a private company who is always going to want to be as in control of the power generation as possible, because that is where their profit comes from. A municipal utility does not have a profit incentive. It is not a for-profit corporation, and it is instead responsible to the citizens, and the citizens demand, and if the citizens demand that they have cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power, that is going to be their mission. So let's go into the funding model. How is it that we, afford this, right? Because certainly, I mean, that's a lot of the first opposition that I typically hear talking to people. Oh, well, isn't that going to just cost, billions of dollars or millions of dollars, and won't it bankrupt the city and things like that? But actually, the funding model on municipalization is actually rather advantageous for the city. Now, what if we went through with municipalization, right? The city would reach an agreement, likely through a court proceeding, with the incumbent utility on the value of their assets, right? The city would then bond for the amount of money that it takes to buy out these assets, right? Let's say $100 million. I don't know if it's going to be that much. Hopefully we'll get a feasibility study in the near future, and that'll tell us more specifically what the money will be. And then the debt service on those bonds, which cities bond at extremely low rates, especially a city like Ann Arbor with its AAA plus bond rating, but even communities with lower bond ratings are still going to be paying rates considerably lower than something that you would see in the private market. They can pay that off with the revenue that is going to be generated by the electrical rates, because now that revenue is all coming to them rather than going out to this private corporation. And in communities that have done this or have studied this, they all consistently find that the revenue generated by these utilities is considerably greater than the debt service on the bonds. We just had a great presentation in the Energy Commission in Ann Arbor from Winter Park, Florida. They bonded $50 million for their electrical infrastructure. And they told us that straight up, the payments for this debt was marginal, that it was not really a significant factor for them, that they still had plenty of money to play with, which they use to do plenty of great programs that I'll actually be getting into later in this presentation. So some of the advantages is that it's not going to raise the taxes, right? And this gets back to the populist point where, there are a lot of people who, maybe they're on a disability income, or maybe they're retired and they're on these fixed incomes. And if you're just keep raising their taxes to fund these programs, so they're going to push back, and they're not going to push back because they're reactionaries or because they hate renewable power or anything like that. They're going to push back because straight up, they're going to have to move if all of that is put onto them, if all of the weight of this transition is put onto them. Instead, where is the money coming from? Well, it's coming out of the people who have put us into this situation. It's coming out of the pockets of those executives that decided that they just weren't going to transition for 40 years after they knew that this was happening. So it's not going to require any additional funding from the city's budget, and typically it's going to give money back to the city. So I'm going to just kind of go into some of the money that is generated by 3 different examples across the state: Traverse City, Holland, and Lansing. Traverse City returns 5% of their gross revenue back to the city. Holland Board of Public Works returns 50% of its net profit back to the city, and Lansing Board of Power and Water returns a guaranteed flat fee. And what that turns into in practical sense is in Traverse City, and this is all coming from the most recent 2020 financial statements, Traverse City returned $1.6 million back to its city budget. Holland returned $7.6 million, and Lansing returned $23.1 million to its city budget. Considerable, right? This is a guaranteed source of income to the city. It's something that can be relied upon. And, we had some great meetings with Chris Bisdock up in Traverse City. Chris Bisdock is the former mayor of Traverse City. He also served on the Traverse City Power and Light board. And he's the partner at the law firm OBH, which did some legal analysis for us that did find that there is no realistic legal challenge that can be brought against a municipalization effort in Michigan. And he said that, it was a cash cow, which is kind of what we're alluding to here with this, is that it was something that the city relied upon. And there's actually a city administrator for the city of Ann Arbor mentioned something similar. He had originally come from working within the city in Austin, Texas, and they have a municipal utility down there. And he was shocked at how difficult it was to budget without that source of income coming in. Is just something that is, electrical rates are one of the most stable forms of income that you're going to find. They only really go up, unfortunately, and they're going to keep going up as we electrify more and more things, as we move towards electric heat, electric cars, electric stoves. That energy cost is going to keep going up, even if we weatherize, even if we do all these things, right? Like the municipality is still going to be getting this source of income in an increasing amount, just because the demand for energy is only going to get higher as we go into the future. So now I want to tell you a little bit of a story. And this is the story of kind of how the energy landscape came to be in Michigan. So it kind of focuses around this whole thing called the Foot Act. Now, I don't know how many people know about the Foot Act that are listening. And if you do, you're probably cursing its name, because frankly, it's kind of a ridiculous agreement, but it is pretty settled, as I'll get into in a Michigan legal context. So in the late 19th century, late 1800s, Michigan cities are starting to electrify. It's a very expensive thing to do, right? Many of these cities fairly newly formed, they're not very wealthy. They're kind of pioneer type still, even though Michigan's a little older than some of the other places in the country. And some of these cities can fund it themselves, and some of them do. They set up their own municipal utilities. A lot of the municipal utilities you see across the state are remnants from this period. where the cities are like, all right, we want to run electric light bulbs, so we're going to start generating power. But many of them don't have the funds or don't want to put the funds up for it, so they decide to get into an agreement with a private investor. All right, you build up the power generation, you string out the lines, namely you string out the lines out to our rural areas, which was a big difficult thing for a lot of these communities to do. And in return, we'll say that nobody else is going to be distributing power for us for some amount of time, right? Like you got to be able to recap your investment. Seems reasonable, right? And so they grant a franchise agreement, is what it's called, which is exactly what I said. Exclusive rights to the service, the electrical distribution infrastructure, and build electrical infrastructure along the right of ways. Now, come to 1905. We've got all of these different communities, all in these different agreements with all of these different corporations, and most of them were pretty small, right? They didn't have the giant behemoths that we have now today. All of them were kind of usually city by city, or maybe a few more than that. And it was kind of the Wild West with the legal framework here. And the Michigan legislature was getting very frustrated with it. So they decided, okay, enough with that. We're done letting these cities define their franchise agreements however they want. We're going to set a single standard for how these franchise agreements are going to be done. Unfortunately, and honestly, I'd love to know more of the history here, exactly how this happened, but just one of the provisions of this Foot Act was that when it rewrote all of these existing franchise agreements, there was no expiration date included in those franchise agreements. So suddenly, every franchise agreement prior to 1905 became indefinite. And this wasn't super popular. People got very upset. They immediately tried to fix it. They passed a constitutional amendment to the Michigan State Constitution saying, all right, no franchise agreement can be longer than 30 years enforced, right? That after 30 years, we have to have the right to terminate our franchise agreement because, well, you can imagine what might happen with a franchise agreement. Maybe you'd have some behemoth company that is answerable to nobody and just decides to consistently give poor service for high rates, and there's nobody that could come into them and challenge them on the market. Kind of a ridiculous dystopian future, I know, but that's what people were worried about. And so they brought forward this amendment, and it immediately got challenged in court. And the Michigan Supreme Court made what is, in my opinion, a rather odd ruling here. They said that, well, yes, your amendment does apply to all future franchise agreements, but they have a contract. You can't modify the terms of their contract. So no, all the previous Foot Act franchises are still permanent, which you might ask yourself, well, wait a second, didn't the Foot Act modify the terms of a contract? Good question. I don't have an answer to you about why the court doesn't consider that, but that is rather established in the law, and every lawyer that we've talked to about this topic has confirmed that. And I've spent the grueling hours reading through a lot of the legal case history, and it has been reaffirmed over and over again on the basis that they have a property right to these franchise agreements and you can't challenge it. So, as I mentioned, throughout the 20th century, subsequent rulings not only find that these are consistently enforceable forever, but they're inheritable. And slowly, one by one, what became DTE and consumers bought out every other power generation company, other than a few smaller ones or some up in the north and areas like that, right? But they bought all of these others up and became the two dominant investor-owned utilities in the state, and they all had these permanent franchise agreements that they had not started. The one in Ann Arbor that is currently still enforced was from 1896, and it was an agreement to service power to 26 electric light bulbs. But that has turned into what is now a permanent franchise agreement in Ann Arbor. But there is hope. That sounds pretty grim, and it is annoying to deal with. It certainly makes it harder in Michigan when you can't remove the franchise from the investor-owned utility. But there is an exception that also has been reaffirmed multiple times by the Supreme Court and is rather settled, is that a municipality always has the right to the right of way within the city. They always have that right to that franchise. They don't need a franchise to do it. It's theirs, right? So they can always operate a utility within their city boundaries. And they also, as I mentioned, protected in the Michigan State Constitution, have the ability to take the electrical infrastructure. Essentially, they can go through an eminent domain procedure to buy out all of the existing electrical infrastructure in the city, force the sale, and return it to the city. So ultimately, that means that.
Greg, you got about 10 minutes.
Oh,
You're doing
thank you.
great. 10
Thank you. I
minutes.
appreciate the time check. Ultimately, that means that no other private utility can compete, but a municipal utility is always constitutionally protected. So what is the process here? I'm going to go a little faster. So first, the city council commissions a feasibility study. This isn't technically necessary. It isn't a legal requirement, but it's pretty important to be able to understand what you're getting into before you do it. Feasibility study evaluates key questions, such as what are the costs of acquiring assets and its ability to service the debt with the revenue after operating costs. Basically, can it do that whole funding model that I laid out earlier? Now, typically the answer is yes. We have great reason to believe that that will be the case in Ann Arbor, but it's certainly reassuring to the voters to know that that is going to be the case before they go into it. Now, once you have all of that information in front of you, bring it to the ballot. Now if you are a city that does not have the permission to do this within the city charter, you'll need to do a ballot amendment, right? City council could, and some municipalities can also do this just by themselves, right? To add those provisions. You create the muni, and then you authorize negotiations to purchase the infrastructure. And this might all actually not require it even to go to the ballot. There is some legal questions there that we're actually currently talking to our lawyers about, but it definitely can happen through the ballot. So now the city enters into these negotiations. People, other detractors of this idea tend to bring up issues here. They'll say, oh, well, they're going to fight you tooth and nail. They're going to fight it in the courts, and it's going to drag out for years and years and years. And yeah, I mean, it might. Now, there's a lot of communities that do this on a fairly reasonable time frame. Jefferson County, Washington did it in 2 years. Winter Park, Florida, it took a few years for them. The state of Maine is doing this at a statewide level. They expect it to take 2 to 3 years. But there are cases like Boulder, right, where it took many, many years to do. And so, yes, that is a risk that you get when you go into it. But I just keep going back to this thing that Jeff Irwin, state senator for Washington County, told us when we first brought it up to him. And he said, well, we were actually talking about this about 10 to 15 years ago. And well, ultimately we decided not to do it because God, it would take 10 to 15 years. So once that negotiation finally finishes, it will go back to the citizens for a vote. And this vote is going to be a 2/3 or a 3/5 vote, the 60% vote. And that vote is constitutionally required to go to the populace. And once it passes, the sale is final. The city will bond for the infrastructure, and they're able to establish the muni. So let me get into some successful examples here. So Long Island did this back in 1998. They now serve well over 1 million customers and reduce their electrical rates by an average of 20%. Winter Park, Florida, as I was talking about before, gave a wonderful presentation to the Energy Commission in Ann Arbor. I highly recommend that you go look at it if you're interested in this. It is available on YouTube. But they made so much extra money off of their municipal utility, even after having to acquire the debt and paying the debt service, that they were able to underground their lines. They're on track to undergrounding 100% of their lines now. I believe that they said in that presentation they were roughly around 80%. In Jefferson County, Washington voted in 2008 to establish the municipal utility. 2 years of negotiations, as I mentioned, $103 million buyout. And now they are one of the cleanest energy mixes in the country at a 97% carbon-free electricity, which hopefully will soon be beaten by Ann Arbor at 100%. So that's all the slides I have here. I know there was a question earlier about whether I would address the issue of the SEU that the city of Ann Arbor is planning. It was an idea that came out of the OSI office, the Office of Sustainability and Initiatives or Innovations. And we've put out a press release on this. And basically, we feel that the SEU has a lot of great ideas in it. Certainly, it's planned for building out microgrids, reducing energy consumption. These types of things are good, just inarguably. And we hope that they happen. They're not going to be able to get to 100% renewable power. Without that ability to connect to the larger regional grid, there simply isn't the generation capacity within the city to get to 100% renewable. On top of that, a large reason for Ann Arborites and probably many communities that are going down this path is not just because they want more renewable power, though that's certainly a large part of it. They want to stop overpaying for poor service. And as long as you have DTE's lines in your city, you're going to be overpaying for poor service. And even if the SEU can alleviate some of that, maybe we're not as tied to DTE, they're never going to be able to fully take over for the role that DTE does without a connection to that regional grid. So for that reason, we support the SEU, but we do not feel that it is a suitable alternative to municipalization. So that's our position on that. And now I believe we have some time for questions, right, Mark?
So we do. If people want to raise their hand, Greg, why don't you close your thing down?
Can do.
Stop sharing,
Yeah, trying to do
and
that.
should jump back here into this. Okay. If anybody's got a question, raise your hand, and looks like Vince Caruso's first up. Thanks, Vince. Can I always count on you? Please.
Thanks for the presentation. Very informative and thoughtful, and it's very supportive from this end. But I think a lot of people in Ann Arbor, like Mark, unlike us, but Mark's got solar panels on his house. He's generating electricity. He's generating clean electricity. And he would like to put as much of that on the grid and get paid for it and have the city become more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly. This is a tremendous way to do that. I think we have huge numbers of Ann Arborites like me who think I'm going to put solar panels on and most of my energy is going to go to DTE for nothing. They're going to take it and sell it at a premium, which is totally crazy and doesn't make any sense. So I think, there's a lot of potential here. I'm not sure if you've looked into that, but what do you think the potential in Ann Arbor is for green energy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's a huge part of it is that, there's been a decent amount of studies that have shown that Ann Arbor is not going to be able to consistently provide 100% of its own electricity through green sources, right? Renewable power is something that's inherently variable, right? Like having that connection to the larger grid when you're at peak generation is valuable to everyone so that you can put that money back, put that power back onto the grid. It helps even it out across, that's why one of the big values of this nationwide grid is that we're able to share this power demand, right? And I think it's one of our biggest assets with trying to move to renewable power because, to get to 100% renewable, you need to be able to supply extra power to the places that aren't generating as highly from the places that are generating more highly, right? So I think that is just on a logistical level. Like I think that having that type of connection is there, and also just on a personal consumer level, yeah, it's totally backwards the relationship that DTE forces into, and we have really no leverage on to dispute that on, right? They get to dictate the terms of that agreement. With a municipal utility, it would be accountable to the people, right? So we could have a much more equitable, relationship between people who are generating excess electricity and what they're getting paid for it in relation to what the utility is making off of it. So I think that's a really valuable aspect of municipalization as well.
Excellent. Lee Andre, unmute yourself. There you go. Unmute, Lee.
One of my questions is, early on in your presentation, you said, and they even have a garbage plant that burns garbage to make electricity. Okay, and then later you're commenting saying, well, we really can't run 100% on our own power because we need connection to the greater grid. But waste to energy plants are not inherently bad if you have some control over your inputs. And Michigan State University
Right.
has a great packaging department. And if they would work with you to develop packaging that was clean to burn, then that's the place that innovative carbon capture could go on, and we could actually take renewable carbon and capture it rather than only think about capturing fossil fuel carbon. I lived in Germany for a few years, and in the city next to us was a wood burning plant. It only burned scrap wood. It had 4 bays where they brought in their fuel. One was from a furniture factory. It was kiln dried hardwood. You can imagine that anytime that power plant needed to gear up its output, that was the go-to pile of wood that they used. And they used wood from the power company, which trimmed trees, and the highway department that trimmed trees, the lumber company that had slab wood, and it only burned scrap wood. So I think that a place like Ann Arbor should try to say, we're willing to build a power plant, and we can make this power plant green, produce green power. And that one in Germany, it was specifically designed to operate between 50% and 100% without any thermal stresses on the equipment. And they had their capital costs covered no matter whether they were powering at 50% or 100%. And their purpose was load following. And it was all renewable carbon.
Good comment, Lee. A feasibility study that the Ann Arbor Public Power has called for would include sources of generation. So hopefully that would be one of the options looked at. And the good news in Ann Arbor is that we've had, I think, the longest running recycling program in the state. So we're already source separating a lot. So I think that would be one of the options worth looking at. All right,
Well,
Abraham, you're up next.
You can imagine how many things would change if we told the Chinese that the only packaging we would accept is stuff that can be burned cleanly.
Yes. All right, Abraham, you're up.
Greg, can you reflect on the city of Boulder's experience? I got it in a little late, so maybe you've already addressed it, but why did that fail?
Yeah, I think that's definitely, I appreciate you bringing that up because it's kind of the elephant in the room in a lot of these municipalization discussions. And I think I would kind of answer back with, did it fail, right? So the city of Boulder entered into this municipalization process for many of the same reasons that we are, right? They were certainly concerned about their the costs and the service that they were getting in relation to it, but they were mostly concerned about climate. And that was the big push of the public effort towards municipalization. And yes, the Xcel Energy fought them tooth and nail, and they went through some fairly excruciating court battles with it. But the city of Ann Arbor, the Energy Commission, just recently met with Jason from Boulder, who went into the city's experiences with municipalization. And one of the questions that was asked to them was, well, would you do this again? And he said, yes, absolutely. This was a great thing for us because at the end of the day, yes, they decided that at least right now, they're not going to municipalize, but they did that with a settlement deal that committed Xcel to an 80% carbon neutrality by 2030, right? It's miles ahead of basically every IOU in this country. And it also included other advantageous provisions about reliability and cost. So yes, they didn't manage to get the public utility that they wanted. But they did manage to get so much leverage that they forced a change at this utility at the state level, which is in some ways greater than they ever could possibly imagine to have been able to make an effect on. So I would say that yes, the city of Boulder, it's a humbling experience. It's something that needs to be considered thoughtfully when you go into this process. And I can also go into like, there are specific legal challenges that Boulder dealt with that are not the case in Michigan. We've had our lawyers look into this, and the legal areas that Boulder challenged, that Excel challenged Boulder on, are not applicable in Michigan. But could DTE find a way to create some frivolous suit that draws us out? Yeah, I can't say that they won't, right? Like, but that means that we have leverage. That means that we suddenly have a seat at the negotiating table to demand something out of these utilities that frankly don't really have anyone doing that to them. The amount of money that they
So I want to get some more questions in. Abraham, the presentation from Boulder that Greg's talked about is on Ann Arbor's website. The Energy Commission meetings are taped, and I strongly recommend that you go look at that. It was a great presentation, about a half an hour long, and it went into the complete Boulder experience. And I have to agree with Greg. It wasn't a failure, and then in the end, they got the outcomes that they wanted. And they also retained the right to go back and continue municipalization if they want to. So it's an interesting model. And I flat out asked them, do you think you could have got to this point without going through this? And they said, absolutely not. So I encourage you to go see. Wayne, you're up. Unmute, babe. Unmute.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. I think municipalization is a great idea, but I certainly have some concerns about it. First of all, I think saying that Boulder got what they wanted is maybe a little bit naive. Excel was moving with more and more renewables at a faster rate. And so to just say, well, that wind systems, those wind farms up in Wyoming, those are yours. I'm not sure that really means much or makes much of a difference. But my question to Craig is, well, there's one other thing, and I don't know if he remembers, back about 25 years ago, there was an attempt by a city in Michigan to get away from consumers, and they were in a court battle for about 10 years. And it was focused on providing electricity to a big manufacturing facility. And what happened is they gave up. The manufacturing facility left town, and so they quit the fight. But my question to Greg is, it sounded like you create the muni with the vote before you settle on assets. Now, does that mean that the muni can start doing things like the stuff that the SEU is looking at doing as soon as you declare it such? Or do you have to wait until I guess it has to do with how the thing is defined as to whether or not you have to wait until you get the assets.
Yeah.
Good point, Wayne.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's one of the most valuable things in that SEU report that I've seen, is basically kind of outlining how, it's relatively legally simple to establish a muni. Actually, it can be done by city ordinance. So the city council could do it without even a vote, right? And so, with that first vote, we could establish that SEU, or that muni, right, which is essentially the vehicle that the SEU uses to do these things, right? Is that they use the powers that they're granted to them from the muni to start these programs. So I think that it's a fantastic idea to, all right, no, we can't tell you with 100% certainty that this is going to happen right away. And there's certainly cases where it has taken a really long time. There's cases where it hasn't taken a really long time. And I think that it's fair to say that we really don't know which way it'll go. But I think that we have to accept that possibility that, yeah, we might not have those electrical infrastructure assets for a while. So yeah, let's get started with everything we can do now. Let's build as many community solar installations. Let's do as much weatherizing, because everything that we do now is super valuable, exponentially valuable, right? But eventually, let's start the process so that in 10 to 15 years, we're not kicking ourselves and saying, God, I wish 10 to 15 years is where I had started that.
God, let's
Let's
hope.
get it going.
Okay, John Goulet. Unmute yourself, John.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. This is just a quick kind of technical question. I think somebody asked it in the chat too. Could a municipal utility include areas that are outside of the municipality itself? In other words, could Ann Arbor include some of the surrounding townships in their municipal utility?
Yeah, so that is actually something we ask our lawyers. Unfortunately, because of that Foot Act, we can't become the service provider to an area with a Foot Act franchise. Someone without a Foot Act franchise, which there's not a lot of them, but there are some within Michigan, could conceivably end their franchise agreement and start one with the city of Ann Arbor. But other than if you have an existing connection to DTE in a Foot Act franchise area, or had one within the last 3 years, it's illegal for us to push that customer. Now, a new construction, maybe a manufacturing plant just outside the city, I believe would be acceptable for them to decide to go with Ann Arbor. And there's also, we asked, and we didn't really get firm answers on this, but our lawyers did also mention that it's possible that cities could form like coalitions, right? That a city, like the township, could municipalize themselves and then form a coalition with Ann Arbor. So that's an option as well.
Okay, great. I got another question here. Abraham, you're back on.
Yeah, we have several Ann Arbor Township islands within the city. And so that would be needed to be addressed somehow.
Yeah, and that's a pretty logistical question that I think is probably best answered with, some actual like study and engineering to see like what are the options there. I'm more of an advocate, so I don't really have quite that technical experience to tell you how to do that. But I agree that that would be like, once you get into the nitty gritty of how do you implement this, like that would be one of those edge cases you'd have to deal with, and there'd be a lot of them. It's not an easy. Nobody's saying this is easy. It's just it will actually work, right?
So we got time for one last question. Anybody?
I'm not looking for easy.
John Sarver, John Freeman, got a question? Now's the time.
Greg,
Yep.
you touched upon it, that Missy Stoltz doesn't seem to be all that supportive. And she seems to be pretty enthusiastic about her proposal. Do you think her concerns are at all legitimate, or do you think there are other reasons why she is not excited about what you're talking about?
We've talked with Missy a lot throughout this process. The very first time we met with her, she was not very enthusiastic about the idea. And while she has warmed up to it from that position, you're certainly right. We'll move her on this still. We're still talking with her. We have a friendly, relationship with her. And I'm not, I can't really speculate too far as to her motives, other than to just accept, in good faith that these are her concerns. She thinks the legal battle is too significant. And that's fair. That's a position she has. We think that it's worth it. We think that we're not going to be able to reach 100% renewable power while retaining DTE in the picture. We think that DTE is a blight on Michigan. We think that their money is corrosive in Lansing, and we don't want to continue to have them have dominion over our lives. And so we think that this fight is worth it, and that's where we're coming from. So you know, it's legitimate to have a different opinion on it, but you know, there's been an immense amount of support in the community for municipalization, and we're going to continue to fight for it. And we hope that you know, Misty will move on this issue.
Well, Greg, it's a very impressive presentation. Would you mind
Very.
sending your PowerPoint to Mark so he could share it with the rest of us?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
Yeah, right after this.
Thank you, sir. Very good.
Thank you.
So we will be doing a follow-on on November 18th. Missy Stultz will be at our Clean Energy Seminar to talk about the SEU, and I think that there's a reasonable question. I think Greg has asked put forth a very interesting question that once we start down this path, then we can start doing stuff. And these ideas are not necessarily mutually. And the good news is we got reasonable people all trying to do reasonable things and good stuff. So I think we'll come to a happy ending here at the end, one way or the other, Greg. And I hope it is without DTE at all. So I want to thank Greg very, very much, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Please take a moment and go to GLREA's website, www.glrea.org, and join us if you haven't already. And get your friends too. It'd be great to give out Christmas presents of GLREA membership this year if you want. We'd like to see those. So please support us so we can continue doing this good work. So I thank you, and we'll see you next on the 18th in November.